Welcome, motherfucking welcome to the very first episode of Unstoppable Marketing and Mindset with me, MG. I am absolutely thrilled to be here. In this episode, I want to take you through the reason why I've started this podcast. This is my third podcast. It's not my first podcast or rodeo. And I want to share with you the journey that I have gone through to get to this point of launching this podcast, why on earth I'm launching an entirely new podcast, and a little bit about what you can expect from tuning in. It's my job in this episode to convince you to keep listening to more episodes. So that's what I'm here for. We're going to start off by me sharing a little bit about who I am, and then we're going to go into what you can expect from this podcast, and finally into a really exciting draw that I've got going right now, just in this very first week as I am launching this podcast. So let's dive into the most exciting topic, of course, and that is me. My name is MG. I am a marketing and mindset coach for women who want to be absolutely unstoppable in business. So I do this through one-to-one and group coaching, and this allows me to work with women all over the world online. I've also got a best-selling book. It's right behind me here, Uncertain to Unstoppable, that came out on the 27th of December, 2021. I am founder of the program, The Unstoppables, which is a hybrid one-to-one and group coaching program. I'm a manifesting generator by human design. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old daughter at the moment, 7 going on 17. Because I'm a manifesting generator and I also have ADHD, I'm an ideas queen. Like, I literally don't sleep because I'm constantly full of ideas. I'm the occasional spaghetti thrower in marketing, because I know that spaghetti throwing isn't strategy, but sometimes you do have to experiment a little. I often do learn things the hard way, and that's okay. I actually quite enjoy the process of learning, and so learning things the hard way is a-okay with me. My highest value personally is connection to self, connection to others, connection to nature. Connection is huge for me. And look, final thing I'll share with you, I do like to think I'm funny. Apparently, one of my biggest strengths is humor. So hopefully we get a few laughs along the way. And I definitely believe that fun is not something that should be left in childhood. We should be having fun every single day as a non-negotiable in our lives. If you've read my book or want to read my book, you'll find out more about my life story. That's not what this episode is about. What I want to tell you about in this episode is my journey to get to the point of creating this podcast in terms of marketing, mindset, podcasting, and business. Go back to 2008. That was when I graduated in June from my first degree in business marketing. Now, marketing was very different back then. The basics, the foundations, consumer psychology, generally the same. But then there's also a lot of things since 2008 that have changed a lot, right? You know, like the way we consume information has changed astronomically, and the speed at which we consume it has also changed astronomically. And really, it's only been 15 years. It's not that long, but it has changed very quickly. I finished that degree while working for a small tourism company in Auckland, New Zealand. You might notice I have a little bit of a New Zealand accent in there. And then 3 days after my final marketing exam, I promptly left the country to travel the world, because I was 20 at the time, and oh my God, I'm so glad that I did that back then. I landed this incredible job, this tourism job, traveling around America. And that was in 2008. So the second half of 2008. And I found myself there in September 2008, not realizing what was happening, unfolding around me, the global financial crisis. And I ended up losing that job. I didn't want to return back to New Zealand out of shame. So I ended up here where I am now in Western Australia, working in retail. I did actually get a job in marketing at Discover WA when I very first landed, like the day after I landed. But I literally got one day into that job, not even one day. I think at lunchtime, I decided, no, I'm not into this. And I left. It wasn't a vibe. I'm very much a vibes person. I think that's also to do with my manifesting generator, sacral energy. And I just went, no, that's clearly not a fit for me. And I walked away. I did, though, go and work in retail and use the skills that I had in marketing and communication and connection to become one of the top sales representatives in Roger David, which was the store that I worked in. I became a manager at that store, and I was working with women who were studying to become a teacher. And I found out how much teachers in Western Australia got paid. And I was like, oh, wow, that's so much better than it was in New Zealand, thinking that, you know, honestly, the pay and conditions in New Zealand, regardless of your profession, is pretty terrible. So I ended up going and studying a graduate diploma in education and becoming a primary school teacher in Western Australia. Now, if you have ADHD or you understand ADHD at all, you'll know that we generally struggle to follow the rules. And look, it's probably why so many of us, we end up becoming entrepreneurs, because we don't know how to stick to society's expectations as ADHD is. We have our own unique way of doing things. And, even though so many of us end up as entrepreneurs, it's also why so many people end up as teachers, because we have creativity, we have ideas, we have a zest for life, right? But it's also, at the same time, the reason why the education department just does not fit with the way our brains work. And so I started some tutoring on the side. That was my first little side hustle. And I used my marketing knowledge to sell myself as a tutor and get some cash in hand, basically. Now, when I went on maternity leave from the education department, when I was pregnant with my first child, I made the decision I would also start to study something part-time so that I could start my own business. I studied personal training because I loved exercise. And let's face it, so much of what we do as entrepreneurs is follow what we love, which is freaking amazing, right? My first business, Total Upgrade Fitness, was born, and it was early 2016. I literally, to get this business started, I walked the streets. I had these pamphlets or flyers printed out, and I walked the streets and handed them to people, starting up conversations about a free boot camp that I was running. I had loads of people come to this free boot camp, and from there I ran a competition where you could win 6 months of one-to-one personal training with me, which is a pretty awesome prize, right? So loads of people wanted that. Lots of people went in the draw. And from that competition, I ended up with a fully booked calendar as a personal trainer in no time. But what I realized after doing this and then starting to run 6-week group programs was that my clients also needed mindset. It wasn't just about movement. And so I started searching for mindset tools to use with my clients when I stumbled across NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So I studied that in order to improve my mindset skills to help my clients. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this was actually what I needed for myself in my own personal mindset, my own processing of trauma from my childhood. And it became a game changer in my own mental health journey. So I started to look more into mindset coaching. And when we moved towns at the time with a 6-week-old and a 2-year-old, I did not have the energy to start up a new small PT gym. So I, from that moment on, focused on mindset coaching. It took me 2 years to hit 5-figure months. And I'm very stoked with that because honestly, I had a baby and a toddler, and that was pretty full on. And I did this through, I scaled to 5-figure months through one-to-one coaching and also a low-cost membership model. It was not long after that I started my very first podcast, Rewrite Your Story with Emily Smith. Yes, Emily Smith is actually my name. MG was a stage name born out of the fact that Emily Smith feels way too boring for me. I'll do a different episode on that entire topic. But I started this podcast, Rewrite Your Story with Emily Smith, and that was a personal development podcast sharing my journey through my own childhood trauma, mindset tips and strategies in order to rewrite my own story. And that launched in August 2020. I actually used the chapters of that, the episodes of that podcast to write the chapters of my best-selling book, Uncertain to Unstoppable. So at this point, I started to have other coaches reach out to me and ask me how I had become successful as a coach. And I realized that by the end of 2020, all of the women that I was working with in a coaching capacity were women in business. So at the beginning of 2021, I started exploring what it might be like to actually just be a business and mindset coach, because it kind of was what I was becoming anyway. And I went to a networking event. While setting some goals there at that networking event, I made the full body fuck yes decision to let go of all of my offerings around mindset coaching for mums and started only offering business and mindset coaching to women in business. Now, this was scary because I had a membership of 100 women that I cancelled, and that obviously removed a pretty decent chunk of my income at the time, but I trusted. That's when the real MG was born. She stepped into business and mindset coaching. It was June 2021 that I launched my second podcast, Conversations with the Real MG. And this was where I got to dive deeper into conversations around business strategy and mindset. So why the change from that podcast to this one? Why not just rebrand the old podcast and keep the same podcast thread and just rebrand it? Why not do that? Here's why. I've mentioned that vibes are super important to me. And when I think about rebranding, the vibe just doesn't feel right. There might not be any logical explanation behind that, but I trust. That's how I've got this far, is I've trusted that gut feeling, those vibes. This podcast represents a whole new energy, a fresh perspective. My last podcast was all about experimentation and fun. And while there will absolutely be a lot of that in this podcast, this variation of my podcast brings a whole new level of maturity, experience, and power that was not portrayed in that previous podcast. I've gone through my own personal transformation and I'm bringing you with me into this transformed version of MG. It's different, it's new, and it's powerful. And I'm excited that you're here. So from a strategy point of view as well, I want to share this process with my clients. I want to share it with my audience, with you. The process of going through from the beginning, starting from scratch with a podcast and making it successful, because podcasting is an extremely powerful marketing strategy for all entrepreneurs. And really, it's not that hard. So many people put it off forever. And I honestly can't tell you how many podcast episodes, first episodes I listen to where they say, I've been thinking about doing this podcast for such a long time. And if that's you, oh my goodness, just fucking do it. Okay. So here we are in episode 1 of the Unstoppable Marketing and Mindset podcast. If you've been listening intently, even though I've really just been talking about myself and my journey, there's been lessons in here. And that's the way that I want to bring energy to this podcast, is by sharing lessons through sharing stories, through sharing value and strategies that allow you to feel engrossed in the podcast, but also walking away with so much that you could implement into your life and business as well. Okay. I'm very transparent in the way that I do things. I'm obsessed with learning new things, even if I learn the hard way. I'm also going to be interviewing some powerhouse entrepreneurs on here. Like, I'm so excited about the women who've already said yes to be guest speakers. And part of me wants to say that every episode or every second episode would be a guest speaker, but I also am not locking myself into that kind of structure, because I know that that's not a vibe for me, right? So what I want to do is, if I have something to share, I will be sharing that with you myself. If I have someone that I'm like, hell yes, I need that person on my podcast, I will interview them. What I can promise you is that you will have an episode to dive into every single week. Solo episodes will be around 20 minutes. This one's a little bit shorter because it's more of an introduction, and the interviews will be no longer than 40 minutes. I know how busy you are. I know how overloaded you are with information. So I want to give you podcasts that keep it straight to the point, no fluff, no bullshit. I'll see you back here for the next episode. Peace out. I'm MG.